right, friends, welcome to Daily Border Crossings. I'm super excited about this episode because I have a really special guest with me, um, Khaled Beydoun, who is a law professor, an activist. There are many words I could use to describe Khaled, and he was on my show in March, and it was very important for me to have him on again, considering everything that's going on in the world right now. And um and he's been super busy. I've been trying to track him down. I'm so excited that we found some time today. So Khaled, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you again, Sam.
Yes. So the last time we spoke, you were promoting your newest book, right? Islamophobia, the New Crusades, which
Yep.
was a follow-up to your book previously from 2018, I believe, American Islamophobia.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that was in March. It was Ramadan. Things are never entirely peaceful in the world, but things were much more peaceful then. To say that all hell has broken loose since then, since we last spoke, I think would be an understatement.
Mm.
And given, I was thinking about given everything that's happened since October 7th and how things keep evolving and changing and unfolding. Again, when we last spoke, you just written a book, but it seems like since October 7th, between Instagram posts and Twitter posts and blogs and editorials and so on, it feels like you've written another book's worth of information since then. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much going on since October 7th, a full-fledged genocide on the Palestinian people of Gaza, which is this small strip of land on the southwestern end of the region across, sitting on the Mediterranean. So I've been entirely enveloped by, daily happenings down in Gaza. I've been not tweeting as much because Twitter's really toxic, but using Instagram, using other social media platforms, writing op-eds, doing public talks, just trying to, educate the masses about what's really going on and demystify a lot of the misrepresentations that are being deployed in the corporate media.
Um, how are you when I'm seeing that you're doing these so many things? How are you holding up though? Because it's like
Yeah,
there's writings that are coming out very often, and there's posts and there's speaking engagements,
yeah.
and you're a professor. So how are you?
Well, I'm not teaching this semester, and that's been a blessing. I'm on sabbatical, so
Okay.
I have the time, I guess, to dedicate
Yeah.
myself fully to this issue.
Are you so morning to night, right? Are you sleeping
Yeah.
much?
Oh, I'm around the clock. Yeah, because I know people on the ground, right? Like I know people
Mm,
on the ground in Gaza, like friends of mine, journalists who I've gotten to know over the course of the last several months, family, friends, family. I'm part Lebanese.
okay.
I'm also ancestrally Palestinian. So a lot of this stuff hits really close to home. Yeah, so in addition to being like intellectually entrenched in it, I'm also very personally connected.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Answered one of the questions I was going to ask if you were if you were Palestinian. Um, so now I am Black. No surprise to anyone who sees me. I identify as a Black woman. That's what I am.
Yeah.
I'm not Muslim. I know that you are because I mentioned we know each other. I know that you are. And in the Black community, I don't speak for all of the Black community, but a lot a lot of it based on what I read and just based on people I know and in my network. A lot of people that I encounter wonder sort of what is going on. We're talking with
Yeah.
uh, Khaled Beydoun. We're talking about the war and everything happening in Israel and Gaza. And so they're wondering what's going on. And I think one of the issues is that there's a lot of limited knowledge about that region and about things happening there. And
Yeah.
that limited knowledge that happens is based on just mainstream media, right? The mainstream news.
Yep.
But I hear questions about, what's going on? How did this start? But what about Hamas? And what
Yeah.
about how did things get this way? What does occupation mean? What does it mean to be under siege? Like a number of things. And I'm just wondering if you can, give your assessment on the history of things as much as
Yeah.
you can, dating back, way before October 7th. How do we get here?
Yeah, I'll try to give like a brief sort of historical survey of the origins of the state of Israel, the sort of
Okay.
genesis, the genesis, no pun intended, even though this is the Holy Land,
Okay.
the genesis of the current crisis, and sort of spell out what some of these keywords are that you've laid on the table. So, 1948 was a really pivotal year because 1948 was the creation of the state of Israel, and essentially the Palestinian territories. That region of the world, which is known as the Levant, encompasses a range of countries: Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, present-day Israel, and Palestine. Essentially, beforehand were colonial protectorates. They didn't have neat boundaries, right?
Mm,
So, post-colonial era, obviously across the world, many of these new nations were essentially colonized by the French and the British, much like African countries or Latin American countries or
okay.
Asian countries, right? So you have that same history. And you had this piece of law, contradictory law that came from the UK, from England, called the Balfour Declaration. And the Balfour Declaration was essentially, a promise made to both the Israelis and the Palestinian people that this land is both of yours, right? It's an English sort of colonial promise that this land will be given to you. However, the Zionist movement, which was this sort of secular identity-based movement rooted in Europe, essentially of European Jews. European Jews are called Ashkenazi Jews. So within the Jewish Israeli experience, there are a range of different sort of names that you'll see that
Okay.
are tied to the ethnicity of the
Okay.
specific Jewish community. So the Zionist organization strategized. Eventually, waves of European Jews migrated from Europe to the strip of land, and they fought with the indigenous Palestinians. And when 1948 came around, they created the state of Israel and began to push out many of the indigenous Palestinians. Many of them, millions of them, were pushed out of the country at large. They ended up in places like Lebanon, which borders Israel Palestine to the north. They ended up in countries like Jordan, which borders Israel and Palestine to the west. However, many Palestinians remained. And since 1948, years passed, decades passed, they become, essentially segregated and relegated, a segregated, relegated population within their own land. You can analogize that to the Native American experience here in the United States when the settler colonialists came. You can analogize that to the indigenous, Black folks that lived in South Africa when the Afrikaners settled and then, occupied and took over. So it's
Mm,
that same dynamic. And since 1948, years passed, decades passed, the Palestinian people are struggling for self-determination and sovereignty. They want their own nation state. There's a series of ways in which they conceive of sovereignty and self-determination. But there's uprisings, there's attempts to sort of free themselves from this, oppressed position. And October 7th was the most recent flare up, if you will, where, Gaza, which is in many respects, far more oppressed and repressed than even Palestinians in the West Bank. I mean, it's this really small strip of land, I think 150 square feet
okay.
total, 2.3 million people, one of the most densely concentrated populations in the world. So October 7th was a sort of flare up where the group that was elected by the residents of Gaza were trying to essentially strike back at an entity that they qualify as oppressive. I mean, that's a
Hmm.
lot, but that's the most brief I can be to give you a cogent history.
No, thank you. No, that's helpful. Thank you. I think another piece, since you brought it, to October 7th. Thank you for that. One of the things that people stick get stuck landing on or come back to is, but Hamas, right?
Yeah.
Hamas, the killings and what happened, and then
Right.
the beheading of children that was reported. That people are saying, where's proof of that?
Uh-huh.
But also, just in general, people think, well, what Hamas did was terrible. Okay,
Yeah.
I haven't heard you disagree with that. But one of the things that I've heard, um, again speaking within Black community, is I've heard that Hamas attack likened to the Nat Turner revolt. Would you say that there's any similarities, any connection with that? Have you heard that
Yeah,
comparison?
Norman Finkelstein said that on Piers Morgan, right? One of the most sort of celebrated scholars who's chronicled the history of Gaza, Norman Finkelstein, who's actually a Jewish scholar, made that very same analogy. Look, the
Okay.
reality is this is, look, terrorism, and I've written about terrorism in my books, for many years now, is a term that is essentially amorphous. It means nothing unless it's given context. And
Okay.
typically speaking, Western governments deploy and define terrorism in ways that suit their political and geopolitical interests. That's why
Mhm.
since 2 decades from now, and that's why I wrote these books. The United States and European governments only view terrorism through the lens of Arab identity or Muslim identity, because that essentially functions as an expedient for them
Mm.
to access oil, to launch unjustified and illegal wars in places like Iraq, and
Okay.
essentially, criminalize an entire region that they want to divide and conquer. So, in the same way that blackness was created in the American experience to sort of flatten a diverse and heterogeneous population of enslaved Africans as
Right.
property, these consolidated monolithic terms serve that purpose. So the analogy you draw is a good one, and I'm less interested in sort of getting into the. I was invited on Piers Morgan many times, and I always said no because
Hmm.
I know the first thing he's going to ask me is, "Do you condemn Hamas?" And to me, that's sort of like a myopic way to analyze what's going on, right? There are far more important conversations that undergird questions like that. So the analogy you draw is a good one, right? Because when a hyper oppressed group, whether enslaved populations here in the United States or oppressed groups in the Middle East, are entirely emaciated from humanity, dignity, natural resources, freedom,
Mm.
the ability to live, of course they're going to do violent things. They're going to do whatever it takes for them to open the door for the prospect for liberation. And that's exactly what Nat Turner did. And a lot of violence took place with that rebellion, right?
Right.
A lot of abhorrent things that you and I and everybody else should ethically condemn.
Right.
A lot of things took place when Hamas attacked that festival on October 7th
Right.
that everybody and anybody should ethically and morally condemn.
Right.
But you and I are sitting condemning from, a lavish position where we're protected from, munitions. We haven't been shackled and enslaved. So we can't from this privileged position like morally assess and condemn a position who are in a circumstance that is entirely foreign um, to us. Like that isn't the question that I think any of us should assess. But the analogy you draw is, I think, a good one.
Yeah, I think it you're right. I agree with what you just said, and it's so hard to. But I have a friend who's Palestinian who said to me, I think that what happened with Hamas was awful, and I think nobody's asking why. Now, this was like a few days after it happened, and
Yeah.
this is what she said to me. But is anybody asking why? And I'm not saying that they should have, but is anybody asking what led up to that? Um, so thank you for that. I want to say I've been sickened so many times
Mhm.
with things that I see, like the imagery.
Mhm.
When you think or hope that things won't get worse, they do again and again, right? The horrid and extremely sad pictures of things like bloody children, pregnant mothers who've been killed,
Yeah.
slain men, people missing limbs, losing entire families. I remember listening to an NPR episode, and they were interviewing a doctor, and they was talking about a child that they were interviewing several of them, but one was working on something because they were at a hospital, and one was working on somebody, and like 5 minutes after this doctor had done speaking, he came back to announce that the child had just died that he was literally just working on. And
Yeah.
so it's all these horrifying things, right? They're losing entire families and so many killings that that there's no place for the bodies, no time for mourning, even at the hospital. So you got to move on to the next patient and go from one patient to the next. The latest, really sickening thing for me has been the picture of Muslim men stripped down, sitting
Yep.
outside in the cold, surrounded by military officials. I'm assuming it's cold, surrounded by military officials. And you write in your blog, I read where you wrote that you write about this and this how it's demeaning and the humiliating nature of it. But you also wrote about the media's way of talking about saving women and children and not so much about men. And I want to quote something you wrote. Um, okay, you said Arab and Muslim men are instantly guilty, stripped of the presumption of innocence and the right to due process. They're never individuals judged upon the merits of their actions, but always lumped into an anonymous monolith that inspects their bodies through the lens of terrorism and instantly assigns guilt because of their identity. They are terrorists until proven otherwise, and that until seldom even comes. They're branded with that label by a system of Islamophobia that is rooted in the Orientalism Edward Said reckoned with 4 decades ago, which is never more potent than today. Now, I've seen in some news media defenses of these photos being that Hamas hides among civilians.
Yeah.
So the actions that are taken to strip them down are necessary.
Mhm.
I mean, can you talk about those photos and what's happening there?
Yeah, so I think those photos are endemic of what's taken place for at least 2 decades, if not more. With what you just read out in the piece that I wrote, the idea that, Arab Muslim men are, categorically lumped up, within this broader stereotype of terrorism. That it's easy for the state of Israel to sort of like pick out civilians and then sell these civilians to the Western imagination and to Western mainstream media that these are terrorists, even though when independent journalists and individuals vetted who these men were, these were engineers and lawyers,
Mm,
shopkeepers and government officials. These were just ordinary civilians. So the state of Israel capitalizes on, this Western trope that all Arab men, all Muslim men are terrorists because it's an easy sell. And second, they use what you just said, the idea that ordinary men are hiding among civilians or
right.
hiding amongst Hamas, I'm sorry, within Gaza, as a way to collectively punish an entire population of Muslim Palestinian men in Gaza. So those two things combined are really powerful and essentially extend carte blanche to the Israeli military to, essentially arrest, punish, and dehumanize and humiliate any Palestinian man they want to. Not only, mind you, and this is why the whole Hamas justification doesn't really work, is because they do the same thing in the West Bank where there is no Hamas.
Mm,
While this crisis in Gaza has been unfolding for, I think today's the 69th day, there have been mass arrests. I think 500 people have been killed in the West Bank.
wow.
Young men, teenage men, as young as 12, 13 have been killed. Um,
Mm,
they're going into homes and, sort of, arresting any man above a certain age, basically above a certain age of youth. So again, once you look closer and once you scrutinize a little closer, and anybody of basic intelligence can, you look at the West Bank where there's no Hamas and you find that the scapegoat doesn't stand.
mm, mm. Um, can you tell us what does it mean to be under occupation?
Yeah, under occupation just basically means when a military police force governs your neighborhood or governs your community or governs your country. So an example would be Ferguson during those protests. Remember those military police
Okay,
that were assigned throughout that city of Ferguson near St. Louis?
right, with Mike
Um,
Brown.
exactly, yeah. After Mike Brown was killed, and you had that mass wave of protests take place.
Yeah.
That's essentially police occupation. I mean,
Okay.
another example of occupation would be in a indigent working class largely black or brown neighborhood in any city in America, Baltimore, Detroit, where I'm from, different parts of Los Angeles, where you have heightened police presence, right? In every
Right.
corner, every intersection. That is a form of occupation that the police is always sort of like not only looking for criminal activity, but reading our bodies through the lens of criminal
Mm,
deviance,
right.
right? So that's another form of occupation as well.
Okay. Okay. So getting back to your book, so much of what you wrote in that book, the labeling, the viewing of Arabs as terrorists,
Yeah.
fears and fear mongering of Arab and Muslim men and Muslim people in general, the Islamophobia in America and abroad that you discussed, looking at
Yeah.
the news and social media and listening to news on the radio, it's like reading your book, right? Like it's like aspects of your book are playing out in real time. Do you see that? Would you
Oh, for
agree?
sure, definitely, yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely see that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. I write about Palestine in the book too. I have a
Okay.
chapter of the book that's dedicated to what's going on. I mean, obviously, it was written before October 7th, so it doesn't address what's happening in real time right now.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but for sure. But this has been, I mean, this is not new, I guess, because it's been my life for the last like 10 to 15 years that I've been studying and researching this stuff. But now I mean, look, I'll tell you, Sam, this has been the most sort of graphic, barbaric,
Yeah.
um, ugly crisis that I've ever seen
Right.
in my life. And I've seen a lot, right? I remember the war in Iraq, the 9/11
Yeah.
terror attacks, the rise of Trump, the mass killing of unarmed black women and men in the United States, the Uyghur Muslim genocide in China, the Rwanda genocide. Like I can't recall, and I'm old. I'm in my young 40s. I'm not a young whippersnapper anymore. I can't
Me too.
recall I can't recall a crisis that's as morbid,
Mm.
inhumane as this, and that's why it's sort of like in many ways just taken over my life.
That's why I think I told you, I was saying before you came on, I keep looking like how and reading people in your comments and just looking at stuff and I'm like, how in the world is this possible to continue? I mean, the UN's calling for ceasefire. There's different people asking for things, but it keeps going, it keeps
Yeah.
happening. In this very scary way. I know we're coming up on time, so I want to ask a couple more.
I can give you like another 15 minutes. Is that cool? I just have an event that I got to go
Oh,
to.
awesome! Yeah, the 15 minutes totally does it.
Okay, awesome.
Um, yeah, I'm wondering who's gonna do what and how's this happening. I wanted to ask a question about like there was a ceasefire for a little while,
Yeah.
and there was a hostage exchange. Well, I don't know if it would be called exchange, but this is what I wondered about it. So Hamas was releasing some hostages, and then in exchange, Palestine would release some prisoners. I mean, I'm sorry, Israel would release some prisoners. And I thought, does that is that I'm not sure if I'm mistaken if Israel also took some Palestinian hostages like during or around October 7th or since the war started, or if people are being called prisoners, but it's kind of like they were being
Yeah.
hostages, for years that are there. I've seen something on social media where somebody, some Palestinian, it was either a mother or a child. They were an adult, so I can't remember, but was released to their family, and it was so moving. And I'm like, it was said, it's like titled the another side of this, the side that isn't really being shown. So it's like there's a lot of talk about hostages that Hamas has, and they're doing this in exchange for the release of people. What about those people? Why have they been held?
Well, look, and that's why it's important to go before start beyond October 7th. That a lot of these quote unquote prisoners were very much hostages. You had individuals who were youth,
I
young
know I heard
women,
about that, right? They were young.
as young as 11, 12 years old, exactly, who were, falsely imprisoned by the state of Israel because they're an occupying force that have unlimited impunity and ability to arrest anybody that they want. So they labeled them prisoners, but they were in fact hostages,
Okay.
right? Some of them had no charges brought against them. Some of them who had charges brought against them, they were really thin or fabricated charges. One girl, for instance, who came out and her release was really celebrated. She was attacked by one of the police officers who was attempting to take off her hijab, her headscarf,
Mm.
and she
Okay.
attacked him for essentially accosting him. In the same way that we see in the United States too here, right? When young black men or brown women or black women are attacked by police indiscriminately and violently, sometimes they fight back, and they should fight back because the arrest is unjust, right? But then
Right.
they're
Right.
arrested. So you have that same dynamic over there. But yeah, so I think, look, they're both hostages. And let me tell you this, like for me, like on a human level, when I
Yeah.
see, these elderly Jewish women or these young Jewish boys and girls being taken by Hamas and kept hostage, I mean, that hurts me. I mean, that resonates with me. These are like
That's right.
innocent people.
Right.
I mean, especially the children, right? They have no choice where they were born. They have no choice where they live.
Right.
So, and I think, for me as an individual, I condemn the sort of punishment of innocence on
Yes.
the other side, whether Israeli or Palestinian, Jewish or Muslim. But yeah, I mean, I think, and it wasn't a ceasefire, right? I think that the language matters. Have you read Paulo Freire,
No.
Pedagogy of the Oppressed?
I know of it. I have not read
Yeah.
that. I should, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important book, but he has a quote from that book where he says language is never neutral, right? So
So
the
what?
late
So what? So wait. So the language of the ceasefire. What do you mean when you say there wasn't a
the
ceasefire?
language of the ceasefire, but also the label that we attach to the individuals, right? So it was by no coincidence that Palestinians were called prisoners and Israeli hostages, right? They were both
Right.
hostages, and that labeling matters. And I think you can't label it a ceasefire also because a ceasefire, in my opinion, and I wrote another piece in my blog on this, ceasefire denotes permanence, right? It denotes a sort of departure from arms and from bombing and from fire. There was no departure from arms, right? It was a moratorium, specifically a temporary conflict pause that was intended entirely by the state of Israel and the United States, which is its primary benefactor.
Hmm.
Um, it was paused specifically for the objective of two things. One of them that we all talk about, which is the hostage release. But the second reason why they wanted the conflict pause is that it would enable the Israeli military to expand its footing in northern Gaza,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So the quote unquote conflict pause or ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, was a Trojan horse for the expansion of Israeli military presence, and second, their ability to claim as many hostages as possible.
You know, the way it was presented, though, kind of different from what you're saying, is that when you're the Trojan horse sort of aspect that you're giving, what was presented, as I'm sure you know, is that like if this ceasefire would go on longer, like it has to be quick and short,
Yeah,
and that Hamas would grow, like otherwise, it would be this thing where Hamas is only expanding its reach and broadening its network,
yeah.
in this short amount of days. I was thinking this sounds hard for them to do as much as they're being claimed that they can do in such a short amount of time. But who am I? What do I know? But I know it was presented in that way, which I feel like is different from what you're saying the purpose was.
Yeah, look, there's always the boogeyman that you embellish their sort of threat. There are
Mm-hmm.
signs across the United States that Hamas is going to threaten American security. Look, Hamas only operates in the Gaza Strip. They're not as
Right.
powerful and influential and as menacing as, being embellished in the mainstream media. They said the same thing about ISIS. They said the same thing before then about Al Qaeda. They said
Right.
they said the same thing about BLM activists. They said the same thing about the Black Panthers. They said the same thing about the Nation of Islam in the United States. Right? There's always this inclination to want to aggrandize and hyperbolize uh, racial communities who are just essentially struggling for basic dignity, even before
Mm-hmm.
the basic dignity. I mean,
Right.
look, I'm no fan of Hamas. Like, I don't agree with much of what they stand for. I don't agree with their mission. I don't agree with their worldview. But
Yeah.
the Palestinian people are not Hamas,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Conflating an entire people with one political party is not only intellectually dishonest, but it does the sort of racial and racist work that enables the state of Israel to collectively punish the entire population of Gaza.
Which is what we're seeing, right? This collective, this let's move. We'll give you time to move here, and then there's not enough time, and where do you go? And you know, we're talking today on Daily Border Crossings with law professor and advocate Khaled Beydoun. Khaled, you and I bonded a lot. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Um, During our time at Harvard where we met, we bonded a lot over you and producer DJ DJ Khaled.
Yep. I mean,
Sim
I don't want you to connect me with him right now, though. He's been messing up.
exact. I know I was gonna
I know where
say
you're going with this.
because y'all have the same first name, and we had our share of we the best, and going back and forth with his signature sayings and these positive affirmations.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's kind of not the same anymore. You've been quite
Oh
vocal.
yeah, he fell off.
Yeah, I mean, I see your milk carton,
Yeah.
a picture of like, where is he? Been vocal about his silence and your disappointment. And I've got to say, I was in a somewhat heated discussion about his noticeable absence because I'm like, wait a second,
Yeah.
where is he? And then I've seen people that support you and what I think about like, hey, why is he being quiet? And then I've heard people who say, well, we don't know how he feels. We don't know what he's doing privately. He doesn't have to choose to use his public platform in this way. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean he doesn't care. What are your thoughts on
Well, look, I typically agree with that idea that an individual who isn't political and doesn't want to speak up shouldn't have to speak up. Just because you are Palestinian or Muslim or or black or a minority doesn't mean you have to sort of like, wave the flag for that community, unless and until we're experiencing a live genocide, right? The scale and severity of what's taking place right now, in my opinion, obliges not only DJ Khaled, but anybody and everybody of conscience to speak up. This is a genocide, man. Like, I mean, if you watch what's happening in real time, 23,000 people have been killed.
that? Oh, is it at 23,000 now?
Yeah, I don't believe that reported number, by the way.
Okay.
It's far higher than that, right?
Yeah.
Look at the number being reported and the number of people missing. If people are missing for 2 or 3 days, they're buried underneath that rubble and they're dead,
Okay.
right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so the number is definitely north of 20,000. I mean, think about that. 20,000 people killed in 69 days. 85 journalists killed in 70 days, 69 days.
Mm.
8,000 children killed
Mm.
in 69 days.
That's terrible.
90% of the population being displaced and homeless in
Right.
69 days, right?
Okay.
So I can go on and on with the stats for you, but the scale and severity of a genocide, I
It's a
think,
lot. It's
yeah. So, I mean, the fact that DJ Khaled is silent and he's Palestinian and he's got family there and look, I'll give you a scoop because you're a friend of mine. I know his cousins, and his cousins have been in my DMs
wow.
cheerleading me to condemn him.
What?
Yes.
Mm.
You know,
This is money. Why do you think he won't? It's probably the image, right? He probably doesn't
I,
want
I
to get.
I think it's two things, right? I mean, look, I think the first thing is yeah, like I mean, this is an issue that is super sensitive and provocative. Like, he's going to lose a lot financially if he takes a position. I have lost a lot financially. Like, I'll tell you, I was slated to start an academic center based on my research, and I lost $850,000 of funding. Right?
What? Oh no!
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
You're true to this. That's a
I,
lot.
I got hit hard. So yeah, for him, it's economic, and I think that look, the music industry has a lot of very powerful and influential uh, people who might have pro-Israeli views, and I think
Right.
that's had the effect of silencing him.
Okay. Okay. Well, I know your Instagram also mentioned Beyonce, Taylor Swift, sort of
Yeah,
having their movies in theaters in Israel, and you just have thoughts on um, non-Palestinian or non-Muslim celebrities or celebrities in general who either aren't being vocal or who are conducting business or operating in manners that maybe directly or tangentially could give an economic boost or support to Israel, right? I think that
yeah,
is what you're saying, that you take issue with you're taking issue with that,
yeah.
and again, people might say that's not fair, that's their livelihood. Same response.
But do we got to worry about Beyonce and Taylor Swift's livelihood? I mean, livelihood entails that you need to make the ends meet to pay the bills and to feed your children. Look, there's no issue with livelihood. So, I mean, for me, maybe I'm I don't think I'm a special person. I don't think I'm somebody of like elevated consciousness, but I would like to think that it's not only a bad idea, but entirely unethical to economically benefit from a nation that is invested in genocide. Like, look, I mean,
Mm,
I'm old enough now to remember the South African apartheid
right.
uh, passage of history, right? And I think that if let's say if we flip the script and say that Israel Palestine was taking place in the 80s and South African apartheid was right now, I would condemn anyone and everyone who's capitalizing economically off an apartheid system in South Africa,
Okay.
right? Because
Right.
by virtue of doing business with an apartheid state, by virtue of doing business with a state that is invested in genocide, you're essentially, right, whether you like it or not, tacitly endorsing what they're doing to an oppressed and marginalized people,
Mm,
right?
not good.
That is tacit endorsement. Now, I don't want Beyonce or Taylor Swift to speak up if they don't have the sort of political will or even the political literacy to
Right.
say something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the bare minimum, I think, is to say, hey, I'm not. And this, let me ask you this: so, do you think it's a good idea to do business with a corporation that funds private prisons?
No.
And would you
No,
would
and I think there's a chance I do that I'm not aware, right? That that I'm not aware that that it's happening.
but they are aware,
Right. Right.
right? So the analogy of a private prison, I think, is a telling one with a state that is carrying forward a genocide or an apartheid regime. And you're right. Sometimes we invest in things and buy things where it's more so we don't have the knowledge
Right.
that that entity is involved with unethical behavior. I mean, half the clothes we buy are probably from sweatshops, right? In the
Right.
United States. But
Yeah.
they
You're
know.
saying there's no way to not know what's happening
Yeah.
right now. Right.
I
Right.
mean, just pick up your phone.
Right. You can't not see. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't not see this. All right. Last two things, and then I'm done. I think we're in a dangerous space where it seems like it seemingly has already maybe become commonplace or even pervasive to equate support for life, for humanity, for the saving of Palestinian life with anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
or the hatred of Jews. I think it's flat out ridiculous that one does not like to say that it's like, okay, if you do this, then it automatically means the other. And I really think people should consider what you're saying, right? Like if they pause and thought about it for a minute, because like, what's the opposite? Like, would you say, does it mean that if you're not anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
then that equates with not wanting the lives saved or wanting, humanity for
Mhm.
Palestinians?
Yeah.
Um, and I just, there was there's things happening all the time where you hear about somebody losing a job or losing an opportunity. There's a thing going on right now in Montgomery County, Maryland, where some teachers reportedly have been placed on administrative leave because they supported Palestine. I don't know all the details, but I don't. It's not my understanding that they said I do not also support Jews, because two things can be true.
Yeah.
You can support them both, and I think you've said that on here. But I'll just let you share any thoughts you have on how I feel like that's a dangerous thing that's happening right now.
Oh, it's hyper dangerous, and it's an entire sort of frontal attack on free speech. I think the most intellectually dishonest and harmful thing we can do is to sort of shroud an entire religion with the nation state, right? The state of
Yeah,
Israel is not synonymous with the religion of Judaism.
right.
And we should, anybody should, including Jews, including Israelis, and Israelis are and Jews are critical of what their government is doing. And what their government is doing in Gaza is genocidal, whether they like it or not. What their government is doing is ethnic cleansing.
Mm,
So vilifying and criminalizing people who rightfully condemn and critique what the state of Israel is doing is anti-Semitic, is not only draconian, but it's also, I think, strategic on the part of many pro-Israeli factions to essentially disarm people from the criticism that enables their government to do whatever it is that they want to do.
mm,
If you can't,
wow.
if you can't critique
Right.
somebody from doing something, because critiquing them would label you a racist. That essentially gives you unlimited runway, and that's what we've seen, right? That's why, in part, this whole conflation of anti-Semitism with Israel
Yeah.
has enabled that regime, the Netanyahu regime, to unleash horrific, ungodly inhumanity on the people of Gaza, because a lot of people are rightfully afraid of being labeled an anti-Semite,
Right.
because
Right. Right.
they're going to lose their job, they're going to lose
Exactly.
opportunities, they're going to lose 800K for a
Everybody's
center.
not you. Everybody's not you.
Yeah, so everyone's got a lot to lose, right? So, in people, I mean, are risk averse, and rightfully so. And I don't judge people, because some folks, unlike Beyonce and Taylor Swift and DJ Khaled, they got a livelihood to make, and they got mouths to feed.
Right.
So it's all a strategic sort of campaign on the part of really nefarious pro-Israeli actors, to silence and suppress righteous indignation and criticism.
Can't critique because you'd be labeled racist if you did critique. I'm gonna rewind back so I'm gonna make that. I like what you said there. You're labeled racist, right? If you do critique, then they can do what they want.
It's kind of
Um,
like this, right? And look,
yeah,
I'm somebody who's written about affirmative action for a long time.
yeah,
It's the whole reverse discrimination thing.
exactly. Yeah, yep, yep, yep,
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like,
yeah,
okay, so if we amplify and raise up the historical and present day injustices and inequality of people of color in the United States, to demand equitable treatment, you're
yeah.
labeled a reverse racist.
It, right, right. No, I agree. I can see. I thought about that, and I see, and I'm just like, who? No one said that. No one said I don't like
And
Jewish
let,
people. It's not what's
and,
being
and,
said
and
at
let
all.
me and let me say this too. Like, look, in all candor, anti-Semitism is a real thing. It's a form of bigotry that is on the rise. It's not new. It's been sort of pervasive for a long time. I'm somebody who is as sort of mobilized to fight anti-Semitism as I am Islamophobia. I'm against all forms of bigotry. And mind you, there's a lot of sort of interesting parallels between Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. What I also think happens too, and I've spoken to a lot of friends and a lot of Jewish friends about this as well, that this sort of diabolical strategy to conflate anti-Semitism with the state of Israel does a disservice to genuine forms of anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, it does. Because it's gonna make people the more I think the more people see that and feel like say, you know, I can't say this one thing because they're going to accuse of this. They're going to start blaming Jewish people for it, even if it's just not Jewish people that are saying it. And I
Yeah,
see people, I see people's shirts on that. I'm a Jews for Palestine, or Jews for we're Jewish. We want a ceasefire. But I hear your point, right? That it can be bad for the fight against anti-Semitism because they're conflating the two. I think that's what you're saying.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. Um, I read a meme recently, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me, but it said something like, "If you ever wondered what you would have done during slavery or during the Holocaust or the Japanese internment or one of these atrocities from history, you're doing it now." And I read that, and I was just like, I just froze, right? Because I'm like, I have thought, what did people think? Like in slavery, I'm like, did nobody walk up to some white person who owned slaves, who owned enslaved people, and be like, you got some people in your backyard. Like they look like they don't want to be there. Like, are you like, can they leave? Or like, is there somebody is looks like they might be bleeding. Are you aware? Like I'm like, nobody went to be like free these people. And so I read that and I'm like, you're doing it now. Because
Yep.
there's this huge genocide, and it's not to say that there haven't been other ones. This is the one that's like so in our face. And so I just thought, what should more people be doing?
Yeah.
And I'll let you close on that.
Yeah, I think that we've seen, in history. There's a great quote from James Baldwin, who's a hero of mine, right? James
Yeah,
Baldwin wrote
he's awesome.
that there are points where I feel like I'm paraphrasing. I'm gonna sort of not get it exactly, but there are points of human history that make me feel as if my oppression is distinct and I'm standing alone.
Mm.
However, then I read and learn that there are various passages of human history that let me know that what I'm experiencing right now has been experienced before. Like that mode of empathy that Baldwin sort of hones in on in that quote, I think speaks to what you were talking about, right? So during enslavement, during previous genocides, during ethnic cleansing and manifest destiny, there were a whole host of good people, right? I'm not
Right.
condemning these people as good people who were either too afraid, who were disabled, who were in a circumstance where they didn't speak up, even though it was the right thing to do to
Mm.
speak up. And even though, I mean, look, and I'll be frank with you, whenever it's an issue of this sort of heightened degree of consequence, there are risks with
Yeah.
speaking up, right?
Yes. Right.
But
Yeah.
taking a moral stance, if you are somebody who genuinely believes in the universal dignity and humanity of everyone, comes with costs. That's why everybody we revere, right, as human rights and civil rights icons, they either lost their lives, lost their
Right.
jobs, lost their sanity, because they
Mm.
were so transcendent that they said, look, I'm going to sacrifice what God has given me on this earth
Yeah.
for a greater sort of cause, whether it's Malcolm X or MLK or Gandhi or James Baldwin or Edward Said, all these luminaries that we love and revere,
Yeah.
especially people like you and I who are like civil rights people, right? These are our heroes. We wear them
Right.
on our shirt, right? So I think that not all of us can be MLK, not all of us can be
Malcolm
Edward
X.
Said, yeah, or Malcolm X, but we can aspire for that, right? And I think that the shirt that you point out really speaks to, I think, that moral sort of dictate that sits and lives in all of our bellies,
Mm.
that says, you know what's going on. You don't got to be a scholar or a PhD on the Middle East or Palestine or Israel to see that young children are being bludgeoned by the hundreds,
Mm.
right? And then
Yeah.
we all have to sort of make this sort of like existential accounting that should I do the right thing? And doing the right thing, should that sort of like trump the fact that I might lose this brand deal or lose 100 followers or potentially have a difficult question pop up during my next job interview? And I
You got
think,
that moral dilemma, huh?
yeah, but I think for me, like the way I sort of like compute that is, um, but this is me and I'm not speaking for anybody, right?
Right.
I don't want to look in the mirror when I wake up or 15 years from now
Yeah.
and see a coward in the mirror.
Mm.
You know, I don't
Yeah.
want to be in that sort of meeting that we all go to, whether it's a DEI meeting or whether it's a organizing meeting or a faculty meeting amongst academics, where everyone's waxing poetic about human dignity and equality and racial justice. Yet in the back of my head, that voice is going to tell me, yeah, okay, you're saying all the right things, but you were silent when it came
Mm.
to these brown people being genocided. And let me tell you, one thing I've learned, Sam, I put a post on it. And sorry I'm talking so much, but
No,
you got me worked
please.
up with this question a little bit. Um, One of the hardest lessons I learned during this whole 2 month phase is
Yeah.
I'm a critical race theorist, and I'm amongst many civil rights scholars and luminaries who I look up to.
Right.
The hardest lesson I learned during this 2 month stretch is to just feel utterly disappointed and deserted by individuals that I respected and revered so highly.
Mm.
There's been so much cowardice um amongst people that always say the right things and have written the most beautiful things,
And now
you know,
they're quiet.
and they stand on this pedestal of righteousness, um that, yeah, and now they're nowhere to be found. And so
Mm.
now when I walk into these meetings and go to these retreats and hop on these Zooms and I see these people, I don't see them the same way.
Wow.
And we can't, I think so. That's when going back to the t-shirt is, yeah, I mean, there's going to come a point where this ends, right? And the next crisis succeeds it or takes its place.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't want to be the hypocrite in the room who was exposed by being silent by, in my opinion, this is my opinion, and I think it might be indebatable, one of the at least one of the greatest human crises of our lifetime.
It's got to be. It's got to be. It's. I mean, I haven't, and I know I'm grateful. I really am grateful having being the mother of a middle schooler. I don't always love TikTok because for me this year has been a loss of innocence in my house. One where my 8-year-old learning the truth about Santa Claus, and then my 11-year-old learning way too much truth about um, let's just say inappropriate, let's just say grown up life. That TikTok and social media has exposed. But I will say I am appreciative of TikTok and social media so that people can do their own reporting, their own on the ground stuff. So you get more than one side of the story. You don't have to wait forever to see, and hear things that are happening. You can hear them and find them out, and take it into your own hands, like by looking at somebody's TikTok. You mentioned that this war will end and the next one will succeed, or this crisis will end. How does it end?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't think it's ending anytime soon, to be honest with you. I think that the bloodiest days are still to come. I think that the next 2 weeks are going to be extremely bloody and barbaric. I think the way it ends is there's going to be some sort of a moratorium on fire that's called a ceasefire. And then people will attempt to go back to what is a dystopian, abnormal life. But I think, I mean, my true response to that is this is another story of the powerful sort of exerting their hegemony over a powerless people. So it's a modern passage of manifest destiny, where you're going to see the Palestinian people being further emaciated, diminished, and pushed as refugees into neighboring and distant countries. And look, I'll be honest with you, the people to blame are you and I, Americans, because our government has enabled that to happen.
Ugh.
It's a bitter pill to swallow, and that's just sort of my intellectual analysis. I hope that wasn't that wouldn't be the case, but for me to tell you otherwise would be me not, being my honest self.
Okay. We'll close on that. Thank you so much.
No, let's close on let's close on a good thing.
Close on something light. With the hearings, it's not necessarily a good thing. With the hearings with UPenn and the presidents of Penn and MIT and Harvard, do you think that the part right where they wouldn't just answer the yes or no question about is the calling for genocide of Jewish people, is that against your policy? Do you think that President Gay and the other ones, did they just get too you're a lawyer? I was like, I think they tried to be too lawyerly in that.
For sure. No, but they had to be, though. They couldn't say anything that would qualify as an admission of guilt, right? Because that was a witch hunt. And it was a very clear witch hunt. What was her name? The congresswoman from New York was trying to get them, right? She even made it out that she was attempting to get them fired. So they had to. And look, this is another sort of dissonance that I struggle with in this current moment is, questions that need nuance in detail that the presidents of those universities are inclined to want to give. There's no appetite for that in a witch hunt of that kind. So they had to respond in very sort of shadowy, ambiguous ways because they were rightfully protecting their jobs, and not only protecting their jobs, but many of them, if they get fired from these jobs, might get blacklisted if they're labeled anti-Semites.
Well, a lot of people then, regular everyday people like me who don't speak lawyer language like you, or just people that I know were just like, she should have just said yes, that's against policy. Of course, it had to be against policy for you to call for genocide. And then, I was trying to say that from what I know, being at Harvard, there was a lot of talk about there's two professors used to say that Harvard is listening to so much lawyer stuff that things have changed and all this kind of stuff. And I think they're trying to protect this and not get to, but it just seems easier said than done, right? Like to be able to just say yes. Like it seems like an easy yes, but I hear you that it's not an easy yes.
Mm-hmm.
But all right, so we need to get on something upbeat, and I don't know what that is. So you're in Dallas? What upbeat thing can we get on? Can we leave
Yeah,
that?
so the upbeat thing is like, look, I think that, one of the benefits of being where we are in the United States and being distant from a crisis like this is that we still have a slate of rights that we need to exercise for people who don't have the ability to speak up and for people who are being perpetually bombed and besieged. So, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a labor of love to fight for justice. And um, you know, even though you don't see the fruit of liberty as instantly as you want to see it,
Yeah,
the commitment to it is a beautiful thing.
awesome. That's true. That's true. And I'll be thinking about that during the holidays and while I'll just have some time away from work. Um, Thinking about what I can do, who I can write, where I can donate and all of that. I will friends, listeners, I've quoted Khaled a few times. There's a blog that you have is Khaled Khaled Beydoun Beydoun .substack.com.
Yeah.
And then social media handles I'll let you share if people want to find you.
Yeah, just my name. Just on I don't tweet as much these days, but Instagram, I'm pretty
Okay.
active. It's just my name at Khaled Beydoun,
Okay.
at KHALED BEYDOUN.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah,
this
no, thanks for
time.
having me on. We'll do it again soon, hopefully when things calm.
Exactly.